Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. Lovely to see so many of you with us today. It's going to be a really, really busy topic today, so I'm looking forward to the next hour absolutely flying by, but I do and am grateful for everyone who's been able to join us already this morning. I've been running this forum now for 5 years, but really weekly for the last 3 years. This is episode 183, I believe we're up to now. So a massive welcome to anyone who's new. If you are, you can find out most of the back catalogue via YouTube and Spotify. You can go and watch all of the old recordings there. We discuss a different thing every week, and this forum is here to discuss, debate, and disagree. We're here to not read from the same hymn sheet, to not hear from our same echo chambers. It's here to make sure that we can respectfully disagree with each other, hear different points of view, and really try and understand every side of an argument, because sometimes it's very, very easy to just hear our own thoughts being echoed back at us. Day to day, I work in recruitment. I partner with the amazing team at Avalon Housing. We have been working between us in recruitment for decades now. I myself have been working in the sector for 14 years. It's that which keeps this running for free. So if you are looking for recruitment support, please do reach out. It's what keeps this forum running and available to all. And also I'm the chair of Spring Housing, St Anne's Hostel in Birmingham. Been part of them now for the last few years. So kind of have my social housing hat on, my roundtable hat, and then the recruitment hat as well. I've known the guys at Green Burton Associates for a number of years. Janine Green came on and did a session with us a couple of years ago. We've had other people who've come on and done some from the same forum, which have been amazing. And even the teams from CMSG and Alertical who are sponsoring today's sessions have come on and run sessions with us. But whenever I find that we have time and find time to do an ASB special, it's always busy. But to do it in ASB Awareness Week has made this one doubly so. So a huge welcome to everyone who's been able to dive on. Joined today by Jack, Madge and Sharon Murphy, who I'll get to introduce themselves in a moment. Both associates of Green and Burton Associates, but both with their housing backgrounds themselves. Jack is, I believe, PSL and tenancy sustainment manager at Teen Housing, which in terms of those who love a social housing job title, have probably never heard that one before. So welcome. And then we've got Sharon Murphy, who's head of housing specialisms. Again, a very unique job title with L&Q. I'm going to pass them across today. If you are new, and just in terms of format and how this tends to work, oh, sorry, Sharon, I've just accidentally muted you. I'm going to pass across to Sharon and Jack. They're going to introduce the topic. They're going to spend about 20 minutes running through the key themes, why this topic matters, why we're here today. If you have thoughts, ideas, questions, just want to download an idea, please put it in the chat box during the opening kind of 20-25 minutes. We'll be, like I say, while Sharon and Jack are talking, we will then move this to a more open forum discussion where you'll all be welcome to come in if you wish to, or again, you can just put your points in the chat and I'll be collating those, bringing those in and putting them towards Jack and Sharon the very best I can with so many of us, best part of 100 people in the room already. So without further ado, Sharon, Jack, I'll pass over to you, and Sharon, I believe you're kicking us off.
I am, yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Matt. Really, really happy to be here. It does feel like a very special session, what with it being day 2 of ASB Awareness Week. So when the question arrived, what should we talk about? There are lots of areas of antisocial behaviour that we could fill the diary for the next goodness knows how long talking about specialist areas. But one of the biggest challenges, I think, for those of us perhaps working in the sector, but equally a biggest area of frustration for residents is, what is ASB? What if it is and behaves like, looks and feels like ASB, i.e. you're a resident that's impacted by someone else's behaviour? And maybe you know the definition of antisocial behaviour. Maybe someone's Googled it and someone's told you that there's a threshold of nuisance and annoyance. And I can honestly, off the top of my head, think of 101 things that cause me nuisance and annoyance, but they might not necessarily meet the definition of antisocial behaviour if I was reporting those behaviours to my landlord, to my local authority, etc. So what happens in situations like that? Well, if my landlord or my local authority respond to me and say this doesn't meet the threshold to be considered as antisocial behaviour, I'm left to just sit and deal with it every day, am I? And that's part of the challenge, because how should we as practitioners respond? So this isn't a session where we are going to be able to give you all the answers. Part of why I really love working in this field and why I've carved a career out in various ASB community safety and housing roles over the past almost maybe 25 years-ish or so, gosh, is because everything is a little bit grey. There's very rarely some black or white advice, guidance, steps, processes. These are the things you should do. And that's a good thing. And that's because we're all individual. That's because we're all different people. We all have different responses. We all have different tolerance levels. We all have different perceptions. And so, you know, what might drive me bonkers might be completely tolerable for the next person. So cut a bit of a long story short, because why use 5 words when you can use 500? That's sort of where I come from. Let me just bring Jack in so that Jack can introduce himself and we can get this conversation going.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sharon. So I've been working in the housing sector for the last sort of 10 years now, and I've really kind of specialised within the sort of remit of ASB for the past 6. I think what Sharon mentions around it being a somewhat grey area, there aren't many sort of black and white scenarios, is absolutely bang on. And I think when we look at this particular subject area, I think it's really important that when we think about no two cases are the same, is when we're looking at how we manage particular cases. It isn't that we have a one hat fits all approach. And one of the things that we're certainly going to be exploring today, and there'll be some various examples that we might refer to as part of the Housing Ombudsman and a recent maladministration, is certainly when it's the circumstances, certainly around things such as vulnerability as well. And this is kind of it goes back into what Sharon was saying around those sort of different tolerance levels. And so what we are looking at is, and this is the title is when we're dealing with reports of ASB which seemingly aren't ASB, can we just say that we don't have to respond? And that's the area, that's the grey area that we really kind of want to explore today. And I think that we as housing professionals around the table, and I know that we've got some involved residents as well that are part of this, which is great, perhaps people from local authorities as well. It's some of the things that we're kind of exploring around this, is some of the other additional pressure points for us, particularly around the various spotlight reports, around the relationship of e-calls, around how we tailor our services and tailor our response to provide an approach which also considers the needs of an individual and their vulnerability, but perhaps it may not be a cut and dry black and white antisocial behaviour case, for instance. Yes, the definition legally is quite subjective, isn't it? I mean, you look at the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act, and that will testify that very fact, because we're working within definitions around harassment, alarm and distress, certainly a higher threshold than perhaps nuisance and annoyance, which would be the legal definition that we as housing providers would be working with. And yet there is 101,000 perhaps nuisance related scenarios that I could probably think of. So it's about trying to get a well-balanced and well thought out approach. And I think some of the things that we kind of want to explore a little bit more today is when it isn't just ASB, and actually it isn't a case that we continue to progress it in that manner, how do we ensure that our policies and procedures around managing vulnerable people kind of work within tandem with that, looking at a good neighbourhood management approach and thinking about things around, rather than saying this isn't something we're going to deal with, actually, it may be the right thing to do to intervene, because whilst it may not be ASB now, it potentially could escalate to that point in the future. But I know that the biggest caveat to that is resourcing. And I think a lot of us around the table will probably think about that and think about, well, how on earth do we resource that kind of demand? Because, it becomes incredibly difficult to manage some of those more complex ASB cases, which take a huge amount of resource and time in order to get the right outcomes, to get the right results. But actually, what we are wanting to explore a little bit more is around how it's not about managing those cases, it's about managing and mitigating the risk of harm for others as well. And I think that we're probably seeing as a sector quite unprecedented levels around vulnerability and people coming into our housing stock. We're doing a huge amount of work as well as a sector, and I know the Better Social Housing Review would have picked up around understanding our customers behind the door a little bit more. So there are opportunities within this today that I feel can be discussed as well, thinking about the information, the data that we do have when people are coming through to us, how is that going to inform our approach or the way in which we intervene moving forward?
Thanks, Jack. One of the particular challenges I think that is felt on both sides of the fence, and I think it's important that we look at both sides, given we have an audience from both sides of the fence, is when something seemingly doesn't meet the threshold to be considered as ASB, and you know, we're saying, is it okay for us to just say, here's a copy of our policy, this behaviour you're reporting doesn't meet the threshold, therefore it's not ASB. And whilst there may be some on the call, there will be some practitioners out there that, you know, our policies are there to guide us. But that brings that straight back to the point that you made, Jack, that it might be the right thing to do to have a response in this scenario. And if we just respond with it doesn't meet the threshold, therefore it's not our responsibility, this is where residents, human beings, people get ping-ponged from one team to the next. So the ASB team aren't going to deal with it. The housing team say, well, it's not us, you're reporting what you think is antisocial behaviour. Antisocial behaviour team are saying doesn't meet our threshold. It's ping-ponging here, there and everywhere. And the resident isn't getting they're just not making any progress at all. And then we risk people taking matters into their own hands. Or the flip to that is people start internalizing and they're suffering, and we are increasing the suffering. So if we are to have a harm-centered approach, and I hope that's a term that everybody is familiar with, it's one that we've been required to have for over 10 years now with the ASB Crime and Policing Act, a truly harm-centered approach is where we don't get prescriptive about behaviours, but we consider impact as well. So if, for example, there are reports of noise, and maybe the resident has been asked to download the noise app, they've made some recordings, and that officer, in their professional opinion, has assessed that this is not something that can be considered as noise nuisance under the ASB policy, and they're not going to manage it under their ASB policy. If the letter goes out to the resident with a strap line that says, you know, thanks very much, I've listened to the recordings, there is insufficient evidence for us to take action. If you don't know what that officer means by insufficient evidence, the resident could well be forgiven for thinking that it's about volume and that you need more. And so they're going to make 57 more recordings of noise that you've already said doesn't meet the threshold to be considered as antisocial behaviour. You also mentioned, I'm just going to quickly come in on the resource, because that is a big ticket item and all of our time is precious. We shouldn't underestimate that residents have time to just hang around and wait for us to turn up at a time that's convenient for us. We're all trying to manage that elusive resource of time, but actually taking the time to explain what that insufficient evidence means, or taking the time to go and visit someone and listen to that noise in their home. It may not come through the noise app, other apps are available, whatever the recording device was used to make that recording, the I guess the situation doesn't translate, does it? That officer in a sterile environment listening to noise is making a decision, which is the difference between it's going to be investigated or it's not. Whereas taking a bit of time out to sit with that person, when does the noise happen most frequently? Oh, it's about 4 o'clock. It probably coincides with children coming home from school. I'm going to do a visit at that time and I'm going to sit and listen to it with you. That would give the officer a real opportunity to see how that reporting party lives, to help maybe shine a light on why they are so impacted by the noise. Perhaps they live alone. Perhaps they don't live with any other levels of ambient noise around them, and so any noise from the neighbour is particularly amplified. Maybe they don't have support networks. Maybe you're going to pick up on some vulnerability that your system doesn't record. And so if you are just assessing something from behind your laptop and PC, whatever device, you're not going to get a picture of how this person lives. And let's not forget that vulnerability isn't static, it changes. And how someone presented to their landlord, to their local authority, when they signed up and took occupation of that property, may be a very different picture from today. And also, today might be different from yesterday, or last week, or last month, or tomorrow. And so we have to remember that vulnerability is not static, it moves. And so it's really important that we consider why. Why is someone taking the time to report to us? Why? Because they're impacted. So what can I do to reduce that impact? Now, it might not be that opening an ASB case is the answer. It would be wrong to open an ASB case if you were satisfied it wasn't antisocial behaviour. But you do have a duty to respond to the impact. And there are some avenues and pathways to do that, which I'll bring Jack in to join in that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think one of the things that I would ask is, when we talk about a harm-centered approach, at what point does that stop? So what we're trying to say is, well, actually, if we were determining that something doesn't constitute ASB, is it the right thing then that we don't otherwise explore that harm and the impact that it's having on that individual? And I think this then comes back into what I was saying just beforehand, was about, well, actually understanding how, how supporting vulnerable people within our stock, where that plays a role in terms of the initial kind of investigation aspect of things, thinking about your tenancy support officers or tenancy sustainment officers that you might have. Is there a role that they could play? What can we do to mitigate and reduce that risk of harm on that individual? Because actually, in the grand scheme of things, a letter just identifying that there is no sufficient evidence and therefore there is going to be no further progress could somewhat exacerbate the situation. And so what we're saying is about, taking a slightly different response that may require us to pivot away from what is black and white, what our policy and procedure stipulates and what it says, to actually start thinking about good quality customer care and service. And that's what it kind of comes back to, really. There's a phrase, for those of you that know Brené Brown, she uses a phrase that I think really resonates with me, and resonates in a way that I think is a powerful play on words, but actually can be really important into how we may lead to better kind of outcomes, both short and long term. And what she said was, I'm not here to be right, I'm here to get it right. And I think there's some really powerful kind of words there that think about, well, actually, when we're trying to think about getting it right, that involves the resident in that conversation. And that truly is when we're starting to look at a person-centric, harm-centered approach, where we're trying to reduce that risk and we're trying to find the right outcome for them. The right outcome might not be that we investigate it because it doesn't constitute ASB, but the right outcome might be that they need some signposting support, etc. And I think that that's kind of what we really think is important to explore here. Certainly when we think about some of the pressures around the Housing Ombudsman and they're being incredibly proactive in terms of spotlight reports and looking at service failings, etc. It's starting to think a little bit more other than just what is process, what is policy. And again, coming back to what is good customer care and good customer service, what does that look like? And also being, professionally curious to understand as well, to think about how we start to utilize the resources that we do have to kind of think slightly wider kind of periphery in terms of, I'm not just an ASB specialist. Actually, I'm here to serve our customers. I'm here to get it right for them. And I think that that's a really key thing that when we look at the professionalization and you can look at the code of ethics around the CIH, those are the kind of things that would be expectant of us to make sure that we are being curious in a way to deliver the right outcomes for that individual. It might not mean that the right outcome is, like I say, opening an antisocial behaviour case. And I think often when we look at stuff like that, we talk about exacerbating the situation. That certainly can exacerbate the situation. It can make the situation become less sustainable longer term as well. So really kind of having our wits about us to kind of recognise what some of those root causes might be and what we can do to try and address that moving forward, I think is going to be incredibly important.
Thank you both. I was just seeing whether there was, I think we're getting to stage, I think, where we're getting a lot of questions coming through, which is obviously fantastic. And I can see a lot of points being raised that would be great to bring to the table. I'm just kind of collating a few of them here. What I will say is I'm going to start asking some questions now. If you would like to bring your own question in, please do use there's a react heart at the bottom of the screen. If you click on that and click raise hand, I will absolutely bring you in, and we'd love to hear from you if you're so willing to do so. I'm going to bring, I've got a really odd background noise, and I don't know if it's my screen or someone else's. Don't know. Anyway, so there's this point that came in and said, would you consider that respect, or where there's a lack of respect for others, is at the root of what is considered ASB, such as noise during the day affects few, but when a member of the household works night, it affects them. Yes, it's about knowing the person, having the ability to assist when needed. Someone else has said this is why low level is sometimes more difficult, as much as tenants may state there's no such thing as low level ASB for them personally living in their homes. But to flip that and say it's low level to one who would deem a nuisance, however, to them it could stop their own functionalities, i.e. PTSD with loud noises, etc. And there was another point around vulnerability of saying, I also noticed at times residents not being empowered to speak to their neighbours or fixing it themselves, because you're meant to go to your housing association and get them to fix the particularly low level incidents. And I feel early intervention and getting to the root cause early on is my opinion. So there's a point there around kind of, there's the respect piece, but also ASB not being ASB. And you and I and Sharon and Jack were talking about this before we jumped on today. So much of the challenges come around the fact that, okay, so it's not ASB, who's going to deal with it then? So great, it's come to the ASB team. They're going, well, it's not ours. They pass it to the housing team. They're going, well, it's not really us. We'll pass it to the local authority. And local authority go, well, it's kind of the police and it's kind of the ASB team, so it gets passed around. And the thing is, no one at any point is taking accountability of it. And do you think this is one of the biggest problems we've got? Alert Call return as one of the keynote sponsors for the Social Housing Roundtable in 2025 into 2026, and we're delighted to have them back. Alert Call help as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. As you can see from this touchscreen I've got with me, Alert Call's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Call, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alert Call work with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and their landlords. In 2022, Alert Call won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023, Alert Call won Housing Supplier of the Year. We're delighted to have them back with us throughout the course of this year, and please do go check them out on social media and LinkedIn to find out more. Thank you very much, Alert Call, for sponsoring us again.
I think absolutely. And in your sort of summary, getting to that question, you you triggered me, Matt. I have a real trigger when we start using the term low level and lower level. It's one of those things that really makes my blood boil, because actually it's pretty arrogant for me to decide what is low level and what isn't. I'm not the one living with that. But what I can do is, in conversation with the person that is reporting the behaviour, I can make an assessment on whether something is high harm or whether something is lower harm. And there are some traditionally listed low-level behaviours, persistent noise being one of them, that would absolutely have the capability to cause extremely high harm, that repeated behavior. And so we've got to come away from looking at behavior types, and for us to sit behind our desks and make that decision. What's this person going on about? This doesn't sound like anything at all. Well, it might not to you sat at your desk. But if you were living with it, if you were living in that person's shoes, walking their life, it might be a different story. And so there's a real need for us to try to put ourselves in those other people's shoes for a day, for a week, to understand why this person is being impacted. And that could be a whole combination of things. It could be because they're no longer friends with that person, and now their behavior is particularly irritating for them, and behaviors that they once upon a time put up with because they had a friendship are now no longer tolerated. But it could be something more than that. It could be that this person has been signed off from work. They've been told by their doctor, by the consultant following an operation, they need to have bed rest and they need to sleep and they need to recover. But actually they can't recover because of what's going on next door. Lots of us, including me, I'm at home, I'm working from home today, and we're making lots of noise during those working hours that we didn't used to make. And so for some of us, our neighbours would have had peace and quiet for long periods of the day when others were out at work, and now that's changed. I don't know about anybody else, but for some reason, I am one of those that seems to think I need to speak a little more loudly when I'm on the phone, or a little more loudly when I'm sat in my room chatting to the screen, not remembering that it will just pick up my voice if I just speak in a normal tone. And so if I've got people living in very close proximity to me, above me, below me, beside me, they're going to hear me on every call and every conversation. But I'm going to think that my behavior is reasonable, but it might sound unreasonable to someone else because of their personal and very individual circumstances. So we've got to start in that early triage stage, risk assessing. What's going on for this person? Why is this having such a big impact for what might resonate as something that maybe more traditionally we might have called and historically called lower level behaviours? We've got to come away from that and just assess the harm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're bang on there, Sharon. I think, so yeah, it is that shift around, ordinarily we might have like a response time with things such as like noise related case. So what you might see is things like, well, 5 working days for us to respond, acknowledge a noise related nuisance case, or, it may be 1 to 2 if it is acts of violence, etc. And it's kind of that shift to now think about, well, actually, when we're assessing the harm, that really should influence our timescales and actually how quickly we might respond to something. And I think what both what the regulator and what the housing ombudsman are saying when they're thinking about tailoring our services, or they're thinking about the transparency and influence or accountability standard, thinking about the diverse needs of customers, when we're assessing vulnerability, which we recognise within our own policies, that it is not just prescriptive or just ring-fenced around protected characteristics. Vulnerability can be a plethora of things in terms of, how you've managed to access housing. It could be that you were a victim of domestic abuse. It could be that you've gone through a homelessness journey and now you're into housing. So it could be so many things. But what it comes back to is being able to track how you are now informing your approach by what you're being able to assess in terms of the harms and risk assess against that. And where we want to be able to get to is a desired destination, so to speak, is being able to really showcase that, well, actually, we had 10 noise-related nuisance cases. Our service agreement, our service standard to our customers is that we'll get round to those within 5 days. Actually, of 60% of those, there was high harm, and therefore we responded in 2 days. And I think that's kind of where we want to be able to get to. And I think that's where we kind of want to be able to showcase ourselves to really kind of ensure that we as organisations are taking a harm-centred approach, but also we are taking an approach that considers the diverse needs of our customers and the vulnerability of some of those customers that are coming through to us. And yes, if we can kick to touch the term low level, then all the best for it as well.
Thank you very much. Alicia, I'm going to bring you in.
I'm going to try not to rant. I think the issue is that we need to look at whether our definition of ASB, when it's regarding the experience of us who are victims or survivors of tenant on ASB, you know, whether we're actually looking at the right things. It was a police officer who said to me that the person who did it to me ended up having a 9-month prison sentence, being evicted. And I've had a lot of support from Avebury Housing Association and Suffolk and Norfolk Police. But the person who did what they did to me was very, very experienced and practiced at ASB. He admitted that he enjoyed doing it. But, you know, they're clever. When you talk about noise, what's in the beginning, he would actually thump up and down. He lived above me. He would actually thump his feet up and down on the floor all day. So I couldn't do anything. What he knew that after a certain amount of time, he didn't need to do that all day. He would just have to thump up and down for a few minutes, which was very difficult for me to get my, you know, the ASB app, the noise app and record it. He'd just do it for a few minutes. I, by this stage, was totally hypervigilant. Outside, I might have been seen as being neurotic, but I was totally hypervigilant. I only needed for him to do that for a minute for me to know the threat. I mean, the language he would use and the threats to kill me were pretty drastic. But we need to understand the fear involved when if you live in a block of flats, you have just one door between you and your tormentor. So I think we have to look at it as being slightly more involved than other ASB. It's totally different. I've been going to the Resolve things starting yesterday, and they were saying, you know, obviously ASB in the streets, people experiencing the streets is a big thing, and there's only 10% of people are talking about it being a problem in their homes. I would say probably quite a lot of those 10% are in social housing. We're all put in here in these places together. We're not the resources for mental health, for drug addiction and everything else. We're all just stuck in here together. We're expected to be able to get on. And quite frankly, in my case, the guy did have serious issues. He needed help. He refused to take the help. But he and I, with all the best will in the world, we were never, ever going to be able to get on. And as I say, a lot of what he did wasn't actually able to be defined as ASB because it was something he's practiced, he knew what he was doing. And for me, I'm not going to go on anymore. For me, the worst thing was because it went to court and there was a victim statement, he then gave the victim statement, my victim statement, to various people he left behind who since carried on some of the ASB. But it's not ASB because it's things like tapping on my windows after dark. They know from reading my statement that I'm absolutely terrified of people being outside my windows after dark. if I go to my housing association and say, well, I think someone was tapping on my window after dark, yeah, I'm realistic. What am I expecting them to do about it unless I have cameras up everywhere? And that, you know, I've investigated that with the police, whether actually cameras is actually going to be an answer. So I think there is a desperate need for us to take ASB in social housing as being something separate and different to ASB, the ASB that other people are experiencing out in the community. As I say, I have to say, every housing association, absolutely can't fault them. They have supported me throughout, and also I've had a lot of support from the police. So this isn't about criticising, it's about looking at the system.
Thank you, Alicia. And I can see a number of the points that have come in via the chat, and I'm going to bring in Samantha in just a moment. A lot of the points in the chat are focused around complaints, expectations, vulnerabilities. You know, someone had mentioned, and I haven't written everyone's name down, apologies, I'm trying to just do this as swiftly as I can, but someone had mentioned, I think we have to balance listening to tenants and doing what we can whilst also managing expectations. Previous ombudsman complaints involved someone who brought their case was ASB, then told wasn't ASB, complained, ombudsman then said was ASB, so it's that lack of consistency. Someone else had mentioned they do a lot of engagement with residents. One of the things I hear more and more is that people want realistic and clear expectations. Even if the response is not quite what we wanted, it's absolutely the relationship of equals, which has just been referred to. Someone had said it's important to always consider that at times ASB complaints can be indicators of domestic abuse that might be taking place for the person the ASB complaint against. So that's more the multifaceted part, which we'll come back to. But the point I wanted to kind of just throw at Jack and Samantha, Jack and Sharon before bringing Samantha, is I suppose that the question here, which someone else had mentioned, about whether a provider's response to a notification of ASB focuses more on the parameters that determine some of the terms used, or more on trying to understand the full picture of what's happening and why. Are we doing root cause analysis done compassionately? And obviously there's some questions around the new law and stuff, which we'll bring in a bit, but this piece that this why focusing on around truly managing expectations, understanding actually what the problems are, getting to the root cause of what's going on, trying to help there, rather than going, it's not mine, or we can all do a little bit, but no one's actually getting to the crux of what's going on. I imagine yourselves as trainers, practitioners, and people who've been in this industry for decades, this isn't new information, is it?
No, it's not new information, but you'd hope that we would have started to, you know, that seed of change would have, you know, we'd be behaving in different ways by now. There are a couple of things. Alicia, thank you for sharing your experience. There are some things, and I'm really pleased that you're being supported, but there will be others on the call and there will be others out there who perhaps aren't getting the same support that you're getting. And there are some things as practitioners that we can look at that help us to determine the pathway, for example. So I've already been banging on quite a lot about just looking at the behaviour and you know, what a slippery slope that is. But there are some things that we can tease out when we're talking to our residents who are making the report that help us to know which pathway to take. We know that the test for ASB, the definition of ASB is that behaviour capable of causing nuisance or annoyance in a housing related setting. Certainly if you're a housing provider, that will be the bar that you're looking at, but that behaviour also needs to be unreasonable, and that's a whole new subjective area. But there were lots of things that you mentioned, that Alicia mentioned, that would help me as a practitioner decide whether that behaviour was reasonable or unreasonable. Firstly, how often it's taking place. So I know that you talked about this sustained thumping on the floor initially, but then only these blasts because he already knew what impact that would have on you. But how often that's happening, the more often something happens, the more impactful that's going to be. That's just everyday maths. How long is it going on for? These sustained periods of noise are hugely impactful, but the time of day when it's happening. Now, maybe there's a bit of an explanation about that. Maybe there's a lifestyle clash. Maybe that someone's on a shift and someone isn't. But there's another big one that we need to tease out, and that is the intention of the behaviour. And we won't find out, we won't know what the intention of that behaviour is without getting out from behind our desks and going out and seeing what's going on in those neighbourhoods. But fundamentally, the impact, if we don't assess the impact, we can't know what pathway to take. But there's so much in there that there are so many signs to spot. That proximity of the behaviour, absolutely. If the behaviour that's having an impact on you is happening in the block where you live or on the street where you live, that's going to have a massive impact, because potentially you're not going to want to leave your home for fear of coming into that space. Yes, Matt.
This is where there needs to be accountability of someone somewhere, and I think it's where
yes,
the changing. It's maybe where the conversations come up today, and this is why Rachel's just put in the chat. And I'm going to bring in Samantha, but I want to come back to Rachel's point in a minute. I want to make sure we come to it. I'm going to go to Samantha, Claire, then you, James. Don't worry, like I'm coming through. Don't worry. But there is a point there saying, how can we evidence intention? And that's such a massive, massive key point. And Jack, I'll come back to you shortly as well. But Samantha, I'll bring you in because we've got about 19 minutes and about 30 hours worth of points to try and get through. So Samantha, I'm going to bring you in. Case Management Solution Group, or CMSG, are the home of React, the UK's #1 case management system for ASB and community safety. We are delighted to have them as one of our key sponsors for Social Housing Roundtable 2025 into 2026. And with the ASB app now fully integrated to the platform, it allows residents to record, monitor and report issues directly to their case office in live time. What's not to love? CMSG are bringing simplicity back to case management, and I cannot recommend them enough and thank them for all of their support through this period and through the rest of the year. Thank you, CMSG, and do please go check them out on social media and on LinkedIn. Thank you.
I've just got, it's a very, very quick point, and I'm going to flip this completely, this conversation, and go the other direction. So, obviously, I've been involved with ASB, and as an education professional, I've been involved with some very, very challenging individuals and learner groups over the years. Now, it's not exactly the same as ASB and living with that. However, I can relate, and some of what you're saying resonates with me. I'm throwing it out there. When you understand where someone is coming from and you understand their situation and their challenges, and you see the world through their eyes, it can significantly help with relationship building. And I think part of what's missing in communities now is us just being very alien to each other. We don't know each other anymore. There isn't a lot of community cohesion. There seems to be just a lack of tolerance and appreciation. Now, I'm not talking about really extreme ASB. I'm talking about, for example, if you have neighbours, how many of us would actually know the neighbours in our street, or all the neighbours in our block? Would we know their circumstances? And when you understand where someone is coming from, it can make it slightly easier to build a rapport, to build communication and building communities. And is there more that can be done to help bring people together so that we can develop just a little bit more tolerance for each other? I am a very noise sensitive individual. I can't bear it. And I know that my ears prick up every time I hear it in the street. So I can appreciate some of what people are saying. However, I've not experienced anywhere near some of the horrible situations that you've all described. But all I'm saying is I think tolerance can come from understanding and getting to know each other and more community cohesion. And I think it's not just about addressing ASB effectively, which clearly everybody here is committed to doing. It's also got to be about bringing people together.
Thank you very much. Go on, Jack.
I was going to say, I think it's a really good point, Samantha. I think I do think there's a level of tolerance there, but I'm always somebody who remains relatively glass half full in many respects. So I know that a lot of us as RPs will be looking at our TSM results, and I think a lot of us will probably resonate that things such as ASB isn't coming up particularly good in terms of the surveys that we're getting back. And I think a lot of associations now are hitting a little bit of a reset button and realigning how they deliver services to provide a bit more of a localized approach. I think coming back to what you said, Samantha, around trying to foster and better collaborate communities together, I think is a really big ticket item for a lot of RPs now, to really kind of engage with their communities, increase their presence within the locality. And it may be a case that through the TSM results that it may be a bit of a tolerance issue, but I know a lot of housing associations were looking at things such as community charters and thinking about those kind of events to think about what the key themes are for those particular areas and what they can do to contribute and improve it, and hopefully start to foster better relationships within that community as well. So it kind of comes back to what Sharon was saying as well about being a bit more eyes and ears and being out on the patch and kind of understanding a little bit more through the eyes of our customers what they're experiencing. And you know, someone said about measuring the level of intent. Well, if you're able to go out and see these things for yourself, you'll be able to get a good bearing and understanding around some of the intentions. Some things may be obvious, some things may be disguised, and we will come across things such as around disguised compliance as well. But you will start to be able to build on some of that local knowledge and information just by being out on the patch. And there's no better early intervention than it not happening at all. And I think, you know, encouraging that we're out in our communities and more present will perhaps prevent issues occurring in the future as well. So how you measure that is a very difficult thing, but I do know that it will be something that a lot of RPs will be looking at, Samantha, to try and build those relationships within communities.
Can I, Matt?
We're running out of time, as I will come back to you. Claire, I'm going to come back to you. James, I'm going in order, buddy. I know you've raised points. I know you're gesticulating. I'm trying to be respectful to everybody, buddy. Claire, I'm going to bring you in.
I was just really interested in what you said about thinking about a harm, and I wondered how involved residents are in determining what level of harm it is.
Yeah, I'll come in on this one. Well, I think this comes back to you know, that's got to be co-developed with the customer when you're assessing that risk. It's about them as to what that impact. It's not right for us to be able to establish how that's impacting and affecting on them. So when we're obviously looking at the level of harm and we're carrying out those risk assessments, then they will be part, you know, front and center in terms of contributing to that, and for us to be able to assess that appropriately. You know, if there are situations whereby, you know, like Sharon mentioned around, you know, people looking at this isolating the sterile environment, thinking what the level of harm is, then that is not the right way of doing things. We need to make sure that we're getting it from the victim's perspective as to the harm that it's causing, or may not be a victim, depending on the type of behaviour, etc. But only when you're able to do that together will you be able to perhaps look at some of the root causes as well. And then that kind of comes back to thinking about, you know, what direction of travel you may go. If it's not ASB, perhaps there's some sort of tenancy support related work that could be offered, or some signposting that could happen as a result of that.
Can I jump in on that just quickly? One of the things I would say is I definitely wouldn't be asking the question to the resident on a scale of 1 to 10, how impacted are you? Because the chances are, well, that they might score 10, and that might be an accurate reflection of how they're feeling. But it might also be because that caller knows that they want to be my next priority, and they're going to answer with a 10. And then you've just got everybody who's scoring themselves at 10. And where do you start? It doesn't help you as an officer to prioritize. But if I took the time to ask some questions and to really get to know that person as best I can, I appreciate I can't go out and visit absolutely everybody that makes a report. But if I had someone that had made several reports and I was a little way in, I'd probably want to go and have a visit with them. And if I was talking, and if I knew a bit more about the proximity, if I knew where this behaviour was happening, how often it was happening, you know, and one of the questions asked was, well, how do we measure intention? But if I've had a conversation with the person that's causing the nuisance, and maybe they've, you know, I've put the allegations to them and they've denied those allegations, I'm going to share with them that this is the behaviour that's being reported, and I'm going to be watching for their response. Now, a reasonable person, I would say, and I would document, a reasonable person, once I know if someone has come to me and said your TV's a bit loud after 8 o'clock when other ambient levels of noise are reducing, could you turn your TV down a little bit? If my response to that is, I'm going to do what I want. It's my house. I like listening to the films loud, or I like being on my PlayStation at volume 50, whatever it is, I'm going to do. And it's before 11 o'clock, so I'm okay to do that. that almost demonstrates intention. Because as an officer, I've told you that after 8 o'clock, it's having a greater impact, and it's tolerable before 8 o'clock. It's not ideal, but it's tolerable. But when everything else starts quietening down, the traffic outside starts quietening down, the people start going to bed, the levels of noise in our own homes starts reducing the later it gets, because we've washed up, we've cleaned the kitchen, kids' TVs are being switched off. That would show, if the behaviour didn't change, but they knew it was having an impact, I would say right there is your evidence of intention. So there are ways of creatively demonstrating some of the things that otherwise seem, how can you evidence intention? That's impossible. Someone can deny they're not doing it deliberately. But now you know about it. What measures are you taking to try to reduce the impact? We're not suggesting that we can create pockets of silence and people to live in silence, but what reasonable adjustments are going on by all parties to either reduce the impact of the behaviour or to reduce how it feels. So I think there are some things that can be done.
It all always just comes back to talking to each other, doesn't it, properly?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of points I want to raise in the chat, but James, I know you've been gesticulating, so I'm going to bring you in if you've got a swift one, because we've got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, Matt, it's not gesticulating as such. The point is, having had 3 years of living with this and losing sleep for the past 3 years at the time prior to getting this bungalow that me and my co-tenants are in now, we used to feed people in the flats. We used to go around and give them dinners, tenants who were living in the flats, off what we did on a Sunday dinner. We tried to get to know the tenants. We unfortunately had a situation where tenants came in from it being a really lovely block, who moved in, doing drugs, doing all kinds of disruptions, parties starting at 4 o'clock in the morning and all kinds of things. But the question that hasn't been addressed by these, your panel here, is the fact that nearly every one of them, as soon as the police are called, will immediately jump up with, I've got issues. They've got more idea of the law than the housing officers themselves. They work alongside the police. They're on first name terms with the police usually. So if you can use, having worked for 30 odd years, working with kids with challenging behaviour and looking after them as a support worker and care worker, and telling them with other jobs. The point is, if you know full well that the response is, as soon as the police come, that they've got issues and they've got a social worker there, the people who genuinely need those assistances may well be falling through the net. But as far as ASB goes, the Housing Association, like was said, were very supportive, very helpful. But if people know the system, you really don't have much of a leg to stand on, do you?
Jack, Sharon, would you like to respond to that on at all? You don't have to.
I was pausing to give Jack
I was being pausing for Sharon as well.
Go ahead, Jack. I've said enough.
I think it's we will have situations like that, which can be incredibly difficult to manage. I think I mentioned around disguised compliance as well, being an incredibly difficult thing to try and manage. I think for us and for me, looking at in those types of scenarios, it really comes down to that kind of, for housing associations to not otherwise be offering or working in silo. If we've got the opportunity to collaboratively work with our police partners and otherwise people around the table. From what you were saying, James, were you talking about young youths offending as well, and social worker involvement in that particular scenario? Sorry, you're on mute. So much the issue around the lack of consistency.
It doesn't have to be youngsters on who are behaving badly. They can be adults as well. But the point is that they all seem to know who the duty solicitor is, who to approach, what to say when the police come, and then when the police go, they let all the friends back in. And people are terrified of going to the housing officers and reporting it, because the windows will get smashed during the night, or the cars will be damaged. So it doesn't matter how much the housing associations do the very best in the south sectors to resolve it, it won't be resolved because people live in fear.
I do completely understand and actually empathise with those situations, but the answer isn't to sit back and do nothing. the answer sometimes lies with persistence and persistently tackling behaviours and trying to disrupt certain behaviours and addressing them, and everybody sitting around the table and getting the collective head together. Because if I'm just looking at what's going on for my resident, I might be trying to address behaviour that's happening in and around the home, but my police partners next door, you can bet your bottom dollar that most of those who are causing issues in and around the home to the level you're talking about, James, will be causing issues elsewhere. And so collectively, what are we doing together?
And this is what, and it's making sure it's collaborative, because as Claire said, you know, I was told to report every act to the police to build a picture, but I hated calling so frequently. So it's got to be collective, because you can't rely on it being an individual.
That's right.
Well, when I saw somebody jumping on a car and stuck my head out the window when I moved in and asked them, hey, what the heck do you think you're doing jumping on that neighbour's car? The doors opened on the estate and they shouted, as one, we don't grass on this estate, and shut the cars. Shut the doors.
And that's a one-off, but I appreciate it.
Well, no, but it's a fact, it's a retaliation.
Absolutely. Thank you, James. So there's a few points here, and we've got like 2 minutes, so goodness knows how we're going to try and answer this one. You've got two massive questions to try and cover, guys, so good luck. One is, can you give us your perspective of imminent crime and policing bill, which will introduce new measures to tackle ASB? How can landlords prepare for this in terms of building better relationships? With many RPs using the 2014 to shape their ASB policy, it'd be interesting to find out what's shaping new policy moving forward. And there's a few points around, like, isn't low level a reflection of the criminality and the ability to use criminal legislation rather than the impact? But we'll come back to those probably another time. But the new bills, the new laws coming in, what are thoughts, what are perspectives on those at the moment?
Well, for the big one for me will be hopefully closure powers for housing providers. That's a big one for me at the moment. If you are a registered provider and you've got the type of behaviour going on that a closure order is appropriate for, you are completely reliant on your police partners and or your local authority partners to support you with that application to the magistrates court. So part of the proposal will be that registered providers will have those powers extended to them, which will make a really big difference to residents. Closure powers, I mean, that's a whole session on its own, actually, but has the ability for that immediate respite. Jack, thoughts on other proposals?
Yeah, just very quickly. So obviously injunctions around a respect order as well. I think for those of you familiar working with an ASB, we know that ordinarily if we're going to court, sometimes some judges will look at what the middle ground perhaps is. I think one of the opportunities with the housing injunction and the sort of respect order is that both applications can be considered the same. So the respect order would come with a sort of sanction, but actually if the housing injunction is the fallback default for that, then that's still going to open up the opportunities around mandatory possession powers as well. So actually there is some good that could come of that. And being able to course and get the right outcomes and like we're saying around disruption, preventing future conduct and behaviour in the future. So there are some opportunities there, but it's probably, so unpick the whole thing would probably be another call.
Or two.
There's a number of points in the chat that we're just running out of time for. So there was something we said, I see this often in my role as an advisor. You go back and forth with LA's ASB team to the general phone number, to the police, to the neighbourhood response team. In some cases, clients have been informed it's not ASB, the client's made a complaint. As a resident, I'd rather feel like I'm being heard than to hear correct terminology. Legislation is important in the area of housing, but how well does that translate to actually tenants what they need to say and what they want to be hearing? Someone that mentioned about, all of this is great, but how are we going to do this with the stretched resources that we have? I think that's absolutely key. The law, someone had mentioned around one of the big challenges we're facing is prescribed cannabis being vaporized. I know you've done another session on that before that you can find online. Definitely something to bring back. I thought we'd done one relatively recently on that. It turned out it was 2022, so definitely time to revisit. Someone said it's the lack of consistent police support is huge. The police cuts having a huge impact on them when dealing with ASB, especially when the perpetrator isn't our tenant but someone associated with them. Safeguarding teams often expect housing providers to take action. It's difficult to do so without the police involvement. We're expected to manage risks we don't have the power to control. That puts both residents and staff in horrendous situations. And we've talked a lot about dealing on a day-to-day basis, individual cases. someone here works in data and often finds it quite distressing looking through data requests and deciding what's okay, what's not to send out as part of a subject access request. Factual note keeping is a must rather than hearsay and graphic photo evidence. Finally, someone has mentioned that it's strange we've had success with injunctions. Perhaps it's the need for witness statements with the real impact, but we have huge support from environmental health, and that's been a massive benefit too. Loads and loads of points coming through and still coming through now. Demi has said, I'm a senior regional lead for the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance. There's so many aspects to ASB and many complexities to each case. Just some food for thought. Noise complaints, property damage. We work with housing providers to improve responses, and part of that work is reviewing ASB cases and look at ways to improve the housing provider can identify and support people who are experiencing domestic abuse instead of treating it as ASB. And I think that's a whole nother case as well. And the overlaps with a lot of these are huge, which I think we've seen today. I'll pass to you both, and where we've run over by a couple of minutes in terms of final thoughts. I mean, this whole piece is I always like trying to leave people with a what next and what do we do first. I mean, good luck trying to answer that, really. But I mean, Jack, I'll come to you first thing as Sharon started the session today. I guess for you, where do people start with this? When we're looking at policy, when we're looking at insight, when we're looking at respect orders and everything else that goes with it, where do we truly start in terms of changing that mindset around, okay, this case doesn't fit into a typical ASB box, but that doesn't mean we can just ignore it?
I mean, that's the question, isn't it? I think for me, it does come back down to, it's around doing what the right thing is for our customers. I think that's where it goes full circle, is that we are here to serve our customers, to serve our community. And therefore, we need to, shift in terms of a culture and mindset way of thinking, to think about, is it just sending a letter to say, case closed, we're not investigating this and we're doing no further action with this? Is that the right response? Or in fact, is that an indicator for perhaps more issues that may be coming to the service within that community as well? And I think that, we've got, I think there's a huge aspect. I know that a lot of organizations, and it comes back to kind of, the hitting that reset button, realigning how we deliver our services, and restarting that in a way that ensures that, from a regulatory practice, we're hitting those consumer standards, but also that we're aligning that with things such as our spotlight reports as well, and being able to come back to, like I say, around delivering what is a quality and effective service moving forward. And I think this is kind of the big ask, is that we now start to pivot slightly to think about, is it ASB, or are we in fact more shifting towards community safety, more per se moving forward, and thinking about our communities, thinking about future sustainability. And I think that we're in good hands. If looking at some of the posts that I've seen yesterday in terms of ASB Awareness Week, it seems to have really leveled up across the sector. And I think that we are in good hands. We have some work to do. However, continuing things such as this to share insight, share information, is going to cause the right outcomes in the future. We've got the crime policing bill, we've got all those things that we need to consider as well. And I know that, the likes of Green Burton will have plenty of things that we'll be showcasing over the course of the next few months and years, opportunity to collaboratively learn and apply that in practice. But that is one hell of a question, Matt, for what is going to be a closing summary.
Thank you, Jack. Sharon, anything that you would add?
I would only add, if you're a practitioner and the report that lands on your desk today, every day, yesterday, if it was from someone that you care about, someone that you love, care about, you would work really hard to improve their experience. You would do everything you could to try and bring out the right resolution. Why not do that for a resident that you don't know? It's part of your job and it's the right thing to do.
Thank you very, very, very much. If you do want to follow up with this at all, please reach out to Green Burton Associates. You can find them online, nice and easy to find, or reach out to Jack and Sharon via LinkedIn. I'm sure they won't mind at all. If you are looking for new apps and things, please do reach out to our sponsor, CMSG. Their ASB app covers more than just noise and covers a huge plethora of things.
It's brilliant.
Huge advocates for what they do here. So do please reach out to CMSG and to the team there at everything they're doing with the ASB app. But for now, A massive thank you to Jack, to Sharon, to Green Burton for helping bring this table to Alertical, for sponsoring us alongside CMSG. And to those who are new, a massive welcome. I hope you've enjoyed today. We are back next Tuesday, where it's a 90-minute special, because we'll be interviewing the 5 candidates for the CIH Vice Presidency and having proper interviews in depth with them. But we have a huge series coming up. Go to avalonhousing.com/SHRT to find out more. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Sharon. Speak to you all soon.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.